We were shocked to determine the constitutionality of Obamacare based on the tax authority of Congress. Was sort of a shocking decision, and that's what it's based on. And it's the entire, the individual mandate is the linchpin, so it covers the entire aspect of the Affordable Care Act. So if you remove that tax, then the individual mandate fails, and Congress itself said that the individual mandate was what made Obamacare work in the first place.
There you go. That was Curtis Hill, Attorney General of Indiana, part of the lawsuit that brought Obamacare down over the weekend, but everything stays in place for now because appeals expected. What does it mean? Well, it means the mandate went away. Therefore, Chief Justice Roberts' rationale for keeping it constitutional went out the window. It was declared unconstitutional. What does it mean for your health care? What does it mean for the future of the Affordable Care Act? Brian Rotella joins us, attorney and founder and CEO and senior partner of Genco Legal. He's got an expertise in health care reform and joins us now. Brian, were you surprised by the ruling?
Yes. Good morning, Brian. And I know we're going into the holiday movie season. Remember the movie The Big Short? What happened Friday night is the big Obamacare bubble. It's not getting the attention that I think the American public really needs to understand. That was, I'm not talking in hyperbole here, that was healthcare's Lehman Brothers moment. What the AG of Indiana just said in the bid on the lead-in, everybody thinks Obamacare is the exchanges and going online and picking out your gold, silver, or platinum plan. Obamacare took over the 20% of the United States economy that is healthcare, and it did it by expanding Medicaid to 19 million people who didn't have it before, and redoing how we do Medicare, meaning the program for folks that are 65 and older, and how they get paid in block payments instead of paying those doctors fee for service. When this is deemed unconstitutional, which I never thought was going to happen, I thought we had 3 strikes and you're out with the court's ruling on this. What this federal court judge did in Texas, and let me tell you, I've read it. It's a 54-page opinion, Brian. It is brilliantly written. This is a brilliant opinion, and I think this thing's going to hold up. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think this might be a 7-1 or an 8-0 or 9-0, opinion on the Supreme Court when it gets there, likely in the spring, because what he said is tying right back to what they said back in 2010. The individual mandate is the baby. You cannot throw it out with the bathwater, and what people need to start thinking about is this goes away. Our healthcare system changes completely as we know it. I don't think people are prepared for that.
Well, no, I've clearly, and Republicans aren't prepared for it either because they got so burned because they didn't have a workable plan on, or agreed upon a plan on repeal and replace. So give me the legal pathway. What happens now?
Well, without a question, there's going to be an appeal from the defendants in this case is what they were called. Because what happened here is you had the attorney generals, like the attorney general in Indiana, but this was in Texas. They filed a lawsuit saying it was unconstitutional because the tax bill Trump passed set the individual mandate tax at 0. If the tax is 0, there's no tax. And according to Justice Roberts at the Supreme Court level of the United States, who upheld this thing, then it's unconstitutional. So you're going to see the folks that are on the bad side of this ruling, they are going to appeal it up to the next circuit court. I have a feeling that circuit court's pretty conservative, not like the Ninth Circuit out in California on the West Coast. They're going to flip it to the Supreme Court. What becomes extremely important now? Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. Instead of talking for a month like we did about Kavanaugh's yearbooks, we should have been talking a heck of a lot about what is Kavanaugh going to say, and we think we know what Gorsuch is going to say about this. Because, Brian, like I said, if you pull the plug on this, think about it for our Star Wars fans out there. When Luke shot his torpedoes into the Death Star, it didn't blow up just one piece of the Death Star. It blew up the whole thing. That's what happened Friday night.
Yeah, I watched the Rockies. I made a choice, so I was really clueless about your analogy. I never watched one Star Wars, although in 6th grade, that was one of the songs my band leader chose for us to play. The theme from Star Wars. So I'm really lost in that. You had me up into the Star Wars analogy, Brian.
I would, Brian, I would pick Rocky, being an Italian American. I would pick Rocky over Star Wars any day. But for that analogy, I can actually take that piece. This would be like worrying about, when I hear pre-existing conditions as a healthcare lawyer, and I have a unique position that I sit in the boardrooms for all these healthcare companies where they talk about how they get paid. This is like worrying about the mop that Mick was giving Rocky as compared to worrying about the Russian who was about to hit him or Apollo Creed. That's what we're worrying about when we're worrying about pre-existing conditions. This is deemed by the Supreme Court, which I think it's going to be this spring in 2019, to be unconstitutional. The 20% of the U.S. economy does not have support for all of the Medicaid funding. You pull the plug on the authority that all these states had. Remember the 31 states who took that extra funding? There is no authority for it. There's no authority for how they're managing the Medicare population.
Is it because, Brian, when you say there's no authority, is because a federal program is funding a state program, and Medicaid
Correct.
is state, and the federal government takes care of Medicare and other things, but they're saying, hey, I'll pay your state program, but most states weren't trusting that the federal government even could do that long term, and they're going to be stuck with the bill.
Correct, and I've heard some other experts, including I was watching you, of course, on Fox and Friends this morning. They were talking about severability. Well, they'll just sever this out and they'll keep the Medicaid expansion. Read what the justices wrote back in 2012 in the big decision on this. They said that you can't sever this out because the stated purpose of Obamacare was to create nearly universal health care. And they did that by expanding coverage, one through the exchanges, one through, remember, the employer mandate. Employers over 50 had to expand coverage, and one by adding Medicaid to places we never saw it before. When you take away what they said on Friday night, what this judge said, and said, look, zero tax means unconstitutional, you completely knock down, Rocky falls down, when you say that about all of the layers of health care that was built in with Obamacare. And I think that what the Republicans and Democrats have to do now, and Trump's got a great opportunity here, right? If I were him, I would put that bill up that failed with John McCain's vote again immediately with the new Congress in January, because the Democrats have no leverage. If the U.S. Supreme Court votes, Obamacare's gone. We're back to
But wait a second. But, Brian, it's got to go through the House first, or one way or a second.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Because we have a
well, you'll go through the Senate, but you're not going to get through the House.
Well, and that's the question, Brian, because we're talking about major negotiations about immigration and stuff. Again, sitting in my vantage point, companies are going to be waking up after they get back from their holiday vacations, and they're going to look at first quarter and second quarter and go, oh, my God, if the Supreme Court upholds this, what are we going to do if we aren't getting Medicaid funding? What are we going to do if we aren't going to have exchange funding? These big mergers like CVS and Aetna, all this stuff's going to start tipping. And like I said, I'm thinking, I might sound like Bubble Boy or hyperbole here, but I think we're going to be really close to looking at what we saw in the housing market with Lehman Brothers. Wow.
I want you to hear Senator Dick Durbin weigh in, because a lot of Democrats are smirking, saying, okay, congratulations, you just caught, the dog caught the car, cut 14.
Well, I think the judge, the Republican attorneys general who brought this lawsuit, didn't do the Republican Party any favor. These Republican attorneys general have set out to abolish this law and to end the protection for people with a medical history. And now this issue is alive and well again. The Republicans have no alternative to the Affordable Care Act.
Brian, I can answer that with Senator Durbin. Pre-existing conditions, I'm self-disclosed. I have Crohn's disease. I've had it for 25 years. I'm in favor of not rating me differently for that, or people that have that, or God forbid cancer or anything else. Worrying about that right now is like worrying about mold during the housing crisis when people are going to lose their mortgages. It's that big of a difference of what Senator Durbin is and the rest of the American population should be. We're talking about if this goes down and the U.S. Supreme Court approves it, all that Medicare fund, our Medicaid funding, the change of Medicare from fee-for-service to block payments, all the exchanges, all of it goes away. Something has to replace it. If the Democrats are just going to keep saying pre-existing conditions till they're blue in the face, I think that they're going to end up paying for this as the ones who have really passed this bill back in 2010, and it had this huge fault line in it.
Yeah, I'm so not interested in the politics of it. Either are you. I just want it to be effective. And when you have 40% of the vote, the electorate said that their number one issue, it was the highest one, by the way, that's why I say 40, it was the number one issue they voted on was health care. And they were effectively able to say Republicans trying to take away your health care for pre-existing conditions when, upon further review, they weren't. But it was effective in getting that message out. They're trying to message this for 2020 when we're trying to fix it now. Here's Senator Roy Blunt, cut 20. Of Missouri.
The president said this was great news for America. Do you agree with him?
I think it's basically just for America, it means we're going to continue to debate this. Health care clearly matters to people. Some of, what we had with ObamaCare, as you've already called it today, was a poorly thought out plan, really poorly implemented to start with, that's had lots of negative impact on lots of families who have insurance they don't need with deductibles they can't afford.
And that's the way it was reviewed prior to this last repeal and replace attempt. But your thoughts, will they continue to debate it?
Well, Brian, here's the thing. The president could look at this one way, that I've got massive leverage if I'm him right now, because U.S. Supreme Court, I'm telling you, this thing's well written. They've already kind of said what they're going to do if you read the other opinions on this. What I think is then you're playing a game of chess or checkers with the American public and their health care, if you're the president or you're the Democrats right now. We think that we get up into this whole thing about government shutdown, and I know that's serious, and a lot of government jobs go on hold for a while. Imagine if you are playing checkers or chess with people's health care and their ability to go to the hospital and say, I have coverage for this. If the U.S. Supreme Court upholds this, the next day there are millions of people in this country that will show up in the hospital and will not have coverage. It's that simple.
All right, Brian, it's going to be interesting. We'll see where it goes. But in terms of the timeline, one more time, when do you think it'll get to the Fifth Circuit?
Well, I think it's going to be two things, Brian. It's going to be a two-front attack. The Democrats are going to try to do the same thing that the AGs did on the conservative side. They're going to try to do that in California over the next couple of weeks. In our friendly jurisdiction out there for them is San Francisco. I think you're going to see that be a second thing that's going on. Well, you're also going to see the appeal in the Fifth. I would guess no later than February. I think the Supreme Court's going to rule on this by June. Wow.
Brian Rotella, thanks so much.
My pleasure as always, Brian.
All right, 1-866-408-7669. Light them up. We can finally open them up. We've given you a lot to talk about. We have the 17 investigations into the president. ObamaCare is now on a respirator. And are we looking at a shutdown in 2 days?